Most of you would have probably seen this interview by now. It is Eddie Hearn's latest on Boxing Social. Highly recommended. I hope Rob Tibbett doesn't mind me saying this, but this is an edited version of the original interview with Eddie Hearn, which was taken down. Now, I suspect, and this is just speculation on my behalf, I suspect I know why the original version was taken down and why a certain portion of that interview was edited out. And again, forgive me for saying this, but I suspect it's because Eddie Hearn potentially could have put a certain member of the boxing media, and this is not somebody associated with Boxing Social, by the way, at least not from what I can discern, but Eddie Hearn could have put a certain member of the boxing media in hot water with a certain promoter because of some of Eddie Hearn's comments in the original version of this interview. Now, what exactly did Eddie Hearn say? He didn't name any names, but he said that a certain member of the boxing media has complained to him in the past about how it's a nightmare dealing with a certain promoter because this certain promoter demands editorial final say over the video interviews that they do with this promoter. So once the interview is done, certain promoter demands that they look at the interview in its entirety and say, take this part out, take that part out, so on and so forth. And they have, like I say, editorial approval over it, final approval. Eddie Hearn is saying that that particular member of the boxing media shouldn't be allowing that promoter to do that. And he also says that Rob Tibbett on Boxing Social shouldn't be allowing that certain promoter to do that. And Rob Tibbett replies by saying, well, if you notice, you're the only promoter I've interviewed over the past few months. And he just leaves it at that. Rob Tibbett, I think, clarified in the comments of this video that he hasn't been banned by any promoter, but you make of it what you will. He says he hasn't done any interviews with other promoters over the past few months apart from Eddie Hearn. So you make of that what you will. And that was a response to what Eddie Hearn said with regards to this certain promoter demanding editorial final say over, members of the boxing media's interviews with this promoter. Hopefully that's not too convoluted and you understood what I was conveying there. Eddie Hearn also was asked about the Dillian Whyte situation. Dillian Whyte is apparently frustrated that he isn't getting, or that he may not get a title shot. He was obviously unhappy with the first offer he got for the Anthony Joshua rematch. And some people have been speculating that Dillian Whyte might jump ship. And Dillian Whyte has apparently been fanning those flames, okay, that he might jump ship and go elsewhere. And Eddie Hearn responded to that by saying, if Dillian Whyte wants to go elsewhere and sign with somebody else, that's perfectly fine. No problem at all. I'd be gutted if he did, but I'm not going to threaten him with legal action like certain other promoters might. I ain't going to do none of that. So again, he's talking about this certain other promoter. And I'll let you guys come to your own conclusions about which promoter he's talking about. But if it's the promoter I think he's talking about, I'm pretty sure we can all agree on it. This certain promoter has a history of not only threatening members of the press and the media with legal action, and I'm talking about numerous members of the press, but also threatening people with YouTube channels with legal action, threatening people on Twitter, threatening people on boxing forums, and as I say, threatening newspapers and members of the press. This has been going on for decades. This is not something new. To be honest with you, I think from what I've heard and what I've seen, that certain promoters have reined in their tyrannical behavior a little bit in light of how much success Eddie Hearn has had because of the fact that he engages with the public and he goes on social media and he talks to people on Twitter. And Eddie Hearn is very accessible. That's one of the reasons Eddie Hearn's become so successful, because he's made himself far more accessible to the public than certain promoters in the past have made themselves. And I think certain promoters have finally cottoned onto this and begrudgingly started to make themselves a little more accessible and have started to do things to clean up their image, because certain promoters began to have a bit of a bad reputation, certainly with older members of the press and fighters and so on and so forth. Certain promoters have been accused publicly by several different fighters of not paying them on time or not paying them at all. Can you imagine promoters being accused of not paying fighters at all? So certain promoters have been accused of this by fighters, and certain promoters have been threatening people with legal action on Twitter, on YouTube, newspapers, people on boxing forums, and of course, threatening legal action against fighters who have left them in the past. And it's not all fighters who have left them. Some fighters have left amicably, have split from certain promoters amicably, but plenty of them haven't. And plenty of them have alluded to it publicly, the fact that they've had issues leaving certain promoters. And again, say what you like about Eddie Hearn. You call him a salesman, a liar, a smarmy, this, that, and the other. One thing you can't say is that you've seen Eddie Hearn in a bunch of legal cases with his former fighters. You can't say that, but you can say that about certain promoters. You can't say that Eddie Hearn has been threatening to sue people left, right, and center on Twitter, on Facebook, on boxing forums, on YouTube. You can't say that Eddie Hearn has been doing that. And I'm not saying he's never threatened to sue anybody. I don't know. Maybe there is some people out there he's threatened to sue. But he certainly isn't as sue happy, anywhere near as sue happy as certain other promoters. And you see, some people think I'm unduly critical of certain promoters, but I'm really not. It's just I've been around long enough, decades long enough, to see certain promoters' true colors, whereas some, I think, newer members of the boxing media might never have seen it. They might never have seen that side of certain promoters. But when you've been around long enough, you will have seen the dark side of certain promoters, the vindictive side of certain promoters. And it's quite scary to be honest with you. So that's what Eddie Hearn appears to be alluding to in this interview. He's striking back at certain promoters and I guess trying to highlight the dark side a little bit and trying to, I guess, turn members of the boxing media against certain promoters potentially, try and pressure certain members of the boxing media not to acquiesce to certain promoters' demands in terms of having editorial final approval, because that's literally what Eddie Hearn is describing here. And Rob Tibbetts doesn't deny this claim that certain promoters demand editorial final approval. Now, some of you may think it's reasonable for certain promoters to demand editorial final approval. Some of you may think it's completely unreasonable because, again, Eddie Hearn doesn't demand that. If you interview him and you catch him out saying something, he's happy for you to go to air with it. He's happy for you to publish it, But certain other promoters are not happy for you to publish something. They want to see exactly what they said and make sure you didn't catch them out anywhere, or make sure they didn't come across bad maybe, or make sure they didn't leave themselves open to any kind of legal action, potentially. Who knows? But yeah, this appears to be a real thing, that there are certain promoters out there who are demanding editorial final approval. when it comes to certain members of the boxing press. And I'm sure they don't do it with all of the boxing media. I suspect they only do it with certain members of the boxing media who might have asked them tough questions in the past. Because certain promoters do not like being asked tough questions. Eddie Hearn don't mind being asked tough questions. We've seen people like Nestor Gibbs and even Kugan Cassius, all right, who's close to Eddie Hearn. We've seen them ask Eddie Hearn tough questions. Rob Tibbetts has asked Eddie Hearn tough questions. All right, but particularly the Nestor Gibbs interviews, you may remember Nestor Gibbs being extremely confrontational with Eddie Hearn on several occasions. But yet Nestor Gibbs was not banned from Eddie Hearn's events. And there's still open communication channels between Nestor Gibbs and Eddie Hearn. Despite Nestor Gibbs being so confrontational and putting him on the spot, yeah, there was no demands of editorial final approval or any of that business. But with certain other promoters, they would never have been allowed to talk to Eddie Hearn the way Nestor Gibbs talked to. They would have never have been allowed to talk to certain promoters the way that Nestor Gibbs talked to Eddie Hearn and put him on the spot like that. Certain promoters don't like being put on the spot. And do not be surprised if you put that certain promoters on the spot. Don't be surprised if you get banned from their events. Don't be surprised if they never do interviews with you again. If you put them on the spot the way Eddie Hearn allows himself to get put on the spot by members of the boxing media. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that, people. Make of it what you will. And, shout out to Rob Tibbetts, man. Good guy, great journalist, great interviewer. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.